what are some of the warning signs that people have too much sugar or refined carbohydrates in their diet?
One of the things that people need to look out for, which is sensed by how you feel as an individual, so everyone's different. When you actually have overloaded yourself with sugars or carbs, is really a feeling of lethargy or not having as much energy, right? And it sounds
Mhm.
ironic because sugar gives you energy, right? Anybody knows you drink energy drinks, it's like loaded with sugar and caffeine. You'd think that it would actually pump you up, but it's really the fact that the aftermath of having too many of an overload of sugar and carbs tends to make you feel tired. A lot of people talk about
Mm.
the glucose spikes and dips, and that's part of it as well. But I think that there are many other things that can actually occur, especially if you're a serial overloader of sugar and
Yeah.
carbs.
Yeah, yeah. And where are the sources do you feel that people are slipping up with sugar and refined carbohydrates? Because I don't think people equate sugar in their diet as accurately as they perhaps should be. Because most people, particularly patients that I speak to, are like, well, doctor, I don't put a teaspoon of sugar in my coffee, or I don't have that many desserts in a day. Where are the places that people are actually slipping up when it comes to sneaking in sugar and refined carbohydrates in their diet, unbeknownst to them?
Okay, so what you're talking about is the person who feels like they're actually pretty healthy, yet they're not feeling that well, and they will
Mm,
tell you or me as doctors, I'm a pretty healthy person, right? I mean, we all have people like that. When you really question them and ask them in detail what they're actually doing, you find out that they're drinking soda. Now, soda is
mm.
probably one of the uh, secret agents, evil agents of sugar that loads you down, like anywhere from 7 to 9 teaspoons of refined sugar. And I always tell people who are surprised by that, right? You drink a can of your favorite soft drink, the colas, and they're like, I can slug one of those down on a hot day or when I'm really thirsty. Or I remember when I was in medical school, I had classmates that would drink a 6 pack of sodas every single day while they were studying, and and and
Yeah.
and this was long before I really got into. I was really researching food as medicine, but it would astound me, right? So think about that: a can of soda having 7 to 9 teaspoons of refined sugar. I always tell people, if I gave you an empty glass in your kitchen and filled it with 7 teaspoons of sugar and just handed it to you to say, down that, um,
Mm.
people would go, no way, I'm going to do that. So I think soda is a sneaky way that you get actually a lot of an overload of refined sugar. Now, what about the other person who basically, and of course, if you're snacking, the ultra processed foods often taste good because they add sugar. But also, so do, the pastries and cakes and things that people have around, sort of eating nonchalantly without realizing they're getting the sugar in. Now, there is an alternative uh, uh, culprit, frankly, where people who overdo things, right? So here's the athlete, right? The marathoner who
Yeah.
basically said, no, 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 listen, I'm really healthy. Let me tell you, I've got like 0% body fat and I eat fruits and vegetables. I'm like, Mr. Plant based. But then you find out that they're somebody who does extreme things. So they'll sit down and they will actually eat 10 oranges a day, or they will, have, a bucket of blueberries. And yes, I think the other extreme is that you can actually get a lot of sugar by eating a lot of fruits that actually contain
Mm.
that sugar. So, although, I think that this is where I try to get people to understand that fruits are a safe form, a safe route to get sugars because you get so many other good things with them. And your body does need sugar, but like everything else, moderation is the key. You can have too much of something that's good and tip over at the point where you're actually getting a little too much of it. So those are some of the sneaks I would actually say. Or the person for carbs, somebody who's a real pasta lover, right? And by the way, you see this in people who work in restaurants. especially people who work
Yeah.
in the kitchen. They make these incredible dishes, and all of a sudden you measure their blood pressure. Their blood pressure is really high, and their blood sugars are really high. And they're like, well, I don't even have time to eat. I don't know what you're talking about. I go to the gym, and you find out that they're eating, pasta and salted restaurant food all the time. So I think that's another place that it's very sneaky to get carbs and sugar in is if you eat out all the time. Busy
Mm.
people who are traveling that don't have the luxury of being able to plan everything, mindfully. Sometimes they're just downing whatever they can, and that's another sneaky source of getting too many sugars and carbs.
Yeah, yeah. I think they're all super valid points, and just to underline what you were saying about the weekend warrior or the wannabe athlete or someone who's just like really into the gym. Someone like myself, actually, I love going to the gym myself. I go most days in a week, but I have a lot of friends who subscribe wholly to the calorie in, calorie out phenomena. This sort of understanding that as long as you are within your calorie count, you'll be absolutely fine, and there's nothing to worry about. Now, you were just talking about binging on fruits, like having way too many fruits, but there are some other people who may not even get the sugar from the whole fruit forms, which are obviously packed with fibers and polyphenols that are super healthy. And you talk about in your books as well, in both of them, Eat to Beat Disease and Eat to Beat Your Diet. What about those people who are slugging the Lucozades, the Gatorades, the high sugars, but they're still within their calorie count and they feel that that's healthy? Are they doing something untoward to their health despite that calorie fitting?
Yeah, well, the whole thing about calories is that it's one word that has become a loaded time bomb because everyone feels that you can have that magic bullet, simple answer solution to all of your health ailments. Calorie in and calorie out is way too oversimplistic, and it's really an outdated idea in and itself. Back in the day, let's go back into a time machine and step 30 years behind, okay, to where we are today. And yes, I mean, I think that the state of the art of thinking about nutrition was looking at calories and proteins,
Mm.
and fats and carbs, but we're way beyond that now. And so in today's world, what we realize is a calorie is simply a unit, a measure of energy that we get from our food. And that energy is sort of the fuel, the gasoline, the petrol that we load into our body, the same way that we actually go to the gas station and get fuel, petrol, to load into our car. If you drive a car that still uses petrol, and you fill it up and then you drive off. But I like to use that analogy about the car and petrol because if you think about it this way, we all know that our cars run on fuel, but we don't think about that fuel very much, and we don't think about all the interconnections between the fuel tank and the fuel injector and all the carburetor and
Mm.
the all the complicated things in the car engine. We just get in and go about our way, just like we go about in our life. The only time we start to focus on the fuel of the car is when the gas meter runs down, the fuel tank gauge runs down. And then all of a sudden, that's all we can think about. I got to find a station to be able to fill up, right? And that's really the same thing in our body. When our body's fuel tank runs low, our fuel gauge registers low. And it's a complicated system, but think about the gut brain axis as being our fuel tank using hormones to signal our fuel gauges low. All of a sudden, all you can think about is going to the kitchen or to the refrigerator or to get something to eat, grab something out to eat, right? So that's kind of that. And then the more you are hungry, the lower your fuel is, the more panicked you actually get about it. Just like when your fuel gauge is almost empty, like you're on the red line, all of a sudden like your pulse is racing to find that petrol station so you don't run off out of gas on the side of the road. That's when we get hangry, right? You're like
Mm.
totally agitated. All right. So the point is that when you go to the gas station to fill up your tank with petrol, we and our bodies fill up our body with fuel, which are the unit of fuel is not gallons, but it's really calories. But just like the car, you know that you have a choice of different types of petrol you could put in. There's the poor quality, cheap stuff. There's the more expensive stuff that's higher quality. And if you fill up your car a few times once in a while with really crappy fuel, it's going to be okay. No problem. Your car is going to be able to
Mm.
do it. But if day after day, week after week, all you're doing is using the cheapest, poorest quality fuel, all right, eventually your car is really just not going to run very well because that car needs to be cared for. Same deal with calories. If you're putting in fuel calories that is higher quality, meaning having those polyphenols, having the fiber, all the good stuff, like eating whole plant-based foods, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and legumes, it's all giving us fuel. But all
Mm.
the other stuff really enriches the engine of our body so that we're going to run longer and better. Just like like if you, and by the way, here's the other thing. If you owned a jalopy, an old crummy car that's been handed down from, an older sibling and then maybe from an uncle, and it's like barely chugging along, the chitty chitty bang bang kind of like jalopy. All right, you might be tempted to poor quality fuel. A crappy car is going to break down faster if you don't feed it quality fuel. All right, so that's
Mm.
one thing and a lot of people start out with not such a great health, and so this is if you're starting out behind the eight ball. All right, if your body is sort of the jalopy and you want to get better, you want to actually immediately put higher quality fuel. Easy, farmers market, produce section of the grocery store. Choose the right fuel, not just calories, but all the other good stuff, and your car will run better. You'll notice it right away. On the other hand, if your car is a Ferrari, guarantee you, if you've invested that much into that beautiful Ferrari red vehicle, when you pull over to the station, you are not going to be putting the cheapest quality gas in there. So you need to actually step up your game regardless of what end of the spectrum you are. And that's why a calorie is not a calorie, and a calorie in and a calorie out is way too oversimplified. Not to mention the fact that there's many ways. I was just talking about the calorie in part. Not to mention there's many
Yeah.
other ways of thinking about the calorie out.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I love how you've used that analogy that is quite commonly adopted as a way to explain calories in, calories out, to actually explain why it's not as simple as that. And actually, you've got to think about the intricacies of a car, whether it is an old banged up chitty chitty bang bang type car or a performance car. You've got to really think about the quality of what you're fueling said car with. And I think you're right. It does get super oversimplified for people. And actually, we've had many conversations in the podcast now about how chronically underfueling your car, which is what a lot of people do with diets in particular, can lead to worse outcomes in the long run in terms of changing your body's set point and then actually having this yo-yo phenomenon where you're actually putting on more weight as well. So there's so many pitfalls there that people need to be aware of. And in terms of calories, and this is something that comes up quite a bit. And although I don't like to talk about alcohol through the lens of calories, and it does tend to have quite a bit, and people don't really realize the energy consumption that people have with alcohol. I'd love to know your thoughts on alcohol because there appears to be a changing consensus on what is a healthy amount of alcohol, what is an unhealthy amount of alcohol, what moderation actually means, and whether we should really be aiming for abstinence in its entirety, and whether that's a reasonable approach. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, Rupi, I'm glad you asked me about that because I have maybe a very humanistic way of thinking about alcohol, and I will talk about the science and the medicine in 1 second. But here's what I want people to know from my voice. First of all, alcohol is part of our humanity. As far back as humankind has been growing things and fermenting things, and whether it's hops for beer or grapes for wine, we've been making alcohol, and fermented products can actually have some good things. With other fermented foods we know is good for gut health, but alcohol, which is a byproduct of fermentation, is first and foremost something that's been part of human ritual for tens of thousands of years. We drink together as a community in celebratory ways, in times of special occasions, holidays, weddings, funerals, New Year, and I think that it's something that we can't um, just brush off with this sort of paternalistic view about
Mm.
alcohol and sickness and illness. And the reason I put that out there is because I don't want to say, abstinence versus indulgence. Now we're starting to talk about feast or famine, gluttony, and all those other kinds of humanistic words, right? But here's what I do think that alcohol plays a very important role to who we are as human beings. That said,
Mm.
I think that if you start taking alcohol in some of the contexts that we often see it, drinking alone, drinking too much, whether you're alone or with other people, drinking hard liquor, not just for celebration, but drinking it for to treat anxiety or depression or
Mm.
loneliness or having some other addictive issue, that using it as part of a salve for other ailments. And then, of course, genetics also can play a role into overconsumption of alcohol. That overconsumption is quite tricky because, and here is really the second main point I want to make. The first being alcohol is part of our humanity and part of human ritual. The
Mm.
second part is that there is no data that I know of, and I study this stuff, that alcohol itself, ethanol, ETOH, for those of us who have studied chemistry, is actually beneficial to your health in any way, shape, or form. Ethanol, which is alcohol, or methanol, if you actually want to get the toxic form of it, is a
Mm.
toxin. It actually does make you disinhibited. It does make us feel great. It does make you drunk. All right, but in no way, shape, or form is ethanol beneficial for you. Ethanol poisons the liver. Ethanol poisons the heart. Ethanol poisons the brain. Again, take a drink, no problem. Your body will recover. Take two drinks, still going to recover. Take two drinks every day, okay, which is what was the healthy amount that people was thinking. Two glasses of wine a day
Yeah.
is probably good for you. That alcohol in those two glasses of wine still is a poison for you. And so people who were going to embark on scheduling two drinks a day were going in the wrong direction. And I think this is what you're talking about, this course correction,
Mm.
which is that the alcohol isn't good for you. What is it that's actually potentially beneficial, or what did we recognize, or what do we now recognize as maybe some upside of beverages that contain alcohol? Well, those fermented products of the grape skin, in the case of wine, so red wine being better than white wine, is really the fermented the polyphenols that get extracted from grape skins. It's the what makes red wine red, not what makes wine capable of making you feel tipsy. It's the
Mm.
polyphenols. And so what's really interesting, and this is a research area that I'm actually pursuing now, is that if you were to
Mm.
actually take fermented, if you take wine and you take the same from the same place that grew that wine and process that wine, and you take a look at the grape juice, not fermented, and you compare the polyphenols and the sugars. So like they're largely the same minus the alcohol. I'm really interested in, and this is one of the areas of research I'm looking into. So, are there real differences between grape juice versus wine? And if you took wine itself and then remove the alcohol, because you can remove alcohol, there are
Yeah.
lab techniques to do that. Now you've got alcohol-free wine. Do you actually have the same polyphenols and other healthful benefits? Because I think this is what we really need to be doing, studying food as medicine, is
Yeah.
not character assassinate an entire beverage or any food on the basis of like, well, we thought it was good, now it's going to be bad. This is what causes whiplash.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I say, for those of us who study this, let's take a measured approach. And so what I just told you is that, number one, alcohol is part of our humanity. Number two, rituals are probably fine. It's just part of who we are. Number two is that, alcohol itself, ethanol, the stuff that makes you tipsy, is never healthy. It's always a toxin. Your body can recover it most of the time. And number three is that the good stuff associated to wine and beer are really in the juice, in the liquid that's not alcoholic. It's the hops
Mm.
in the beer, it's the fermented grape skin in the wine. And by the way, the reason we know this is almost certainly true is because if you take vodka, if you take pure straight liquor, okay, and you look
Yeah.
at the health benefits of that, there's none. When you remove most of the other stuff, you get no benefits and all downside.
Right, right. This is a great discussion because I think I love how you've given some pretext to this in terms of not wanting to sound puritanical and actually respecting the conviviality of what is quite a socially binding common ingredient across multiple cultures, from Europeans to Chinese to Indian American, everyone appears to have alcohol as this binding phenomena. And what I'm interested in is actually whether we can separate out those benefits into a drink that is seen as celebratory but without the ethanol. And I guess this is probably very hard to find an answer for, and I'm not expecting an answer whatsoever. But is there a minimum dose that, despite the toxicity that ethanol can actually induce in the liver, and we know it's a hepatotoxic ingredient, is there a small amount that induces a bit of toxicity that actually results in some benefit, very much in the same way that we understand plants like spices, turmeric, can exert what's called a hormetic effect, things that you talk about in your books. Do you think there's any sort of ounce of truth in that, or are you convinced that it's actually in the ferments, in the juice, that where the benefits are?
All right. You're asking a really interesting question, and I'm going to answer it first as a scientist because I do research and I want to be fair to your question. But then I'm going to answer it again in a way that I think is more common sense for people who are not scientists. So, as a scientist, what you're
Mm,
asking me is that, like everything else, is the poison in the dose.
mm,
And this is an old concept that, if you do a low dose, you actually get the cure. If you do a high dose, you get the poison. Hormesis is really this idea that a little is not enough, a little bit more is better, a little bit more gets you the best result. And then if you keep going, you actually get harm. And what's that sweet spot, the bullseye from a dosing perspective? And so
mm.
that would be a really, really worthy area of research to take a look at is, are there commonly consumed substances? We could talk about sugar as well. Okay, another
Yeah,
demonized
yeah.
substance where, what's the sweet spot that we could actually find in the lab, in cells and animals. I think once you get to people, Rupi, where the systems are much more complicated. There's gender difference. Are males and females the same? There's age differences. Is it different in a teenager
Mm,
versus a middle age versus an elderly? There are genetic differences, of course, which probably are somewhat minor, although when it comes to alcohol, there are people, particularly Asian descent people, that often have low or missing levels of alcohol dehydrogenase. So a tincture of alcohol to many Asians will cause them to become beet red and tipsy when, to a good Irishman or a Scotsman would never touch them. It would they would bounce off their breastplate. So I think that there's genetics. I also that there's comorbidities, right? People have different underlying conditions. So I think this would be worthy to study conceptually in the lab, but
mm.
I hesitate in saying that there's even a little bit of alcohol that might be beneficial because we don't have the evidence for that. Although in
Yeah.
theory it may be true. I mean, here's a way to think about it. If you trigger a little injury, you're actually going to trigger your body's health defenses to repair. In triggering that repair, could we be setting off a domino effect for repair in other areas? Okay,
Yeah.
so I think theoretically that's actually a really good question. In practice, it's probably difficult to measure. And then here's the other kind of common sense concept when it comes to alcohol. And you and I have talked about this before on the show, and I know a lot of people are curious about this because of the role of alcohol in our society, in many of our individual lives. This is the whole thing. If you actually practice moderation and you don't drink too often and you don't drink too much, you're probably going to be just fine. But
Mm.
if you start to pursue or find an excuse to regularly drink alcohol, day in and day out, week after week, and this is sort of the pattern that I often see in patients, you're setting yourself up for a problem. It's going to happen,
Mm.
maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but eventually you'll reach the tipping point in your body because, as we all get older, we become more vulnerable naturally, especially if you don't take care of yourself in other ways. And these other ways,
Yeah.
this is that complex global nature of health. When we're talking about health, we're talking about shoring up this remarkable thing called the human body that has many different ways that it protects who we are, it protects our well-being. And so I'm also, while I'm hesitant to justify any benefits of ethanol, alcohol, I'm also very hesitant to demonize anything categorically because our body can actually stand back. So I'm saying that if you're actually toasting somebody at New Year's or at a wedding, I would say, please celebrate your humanity. That's going to be just fine.
Yeah, I love that answer. That's completely in line with my thinking on alcohol right now. As someone who has actually reduced their alcohol consumption massively over the last 10 years, from med school days, now like it'd be rare to find a week where I consume more than 1 to 2 units. What I am noticing in the market are lower ABV drinks being promoted out there. So instead of a 40% ABV drink that you'll find like a gin, you see quarter levels of that, and that's interesting to see. And overall, I think that's a net positive thing, as long as people still drink the same amount and not having 4 drinks instead of the one that they would otherwise have. This is really fun. I love like throwing these kind of questions at you because it promotes a healthy discussion. And this leans into my next question actually about coffee. Now,
Mm,
I'm a coffee lover. I love my coffee.
me too.
I'm currently doing a coffee fast for 30 days. So I'm trying out different drinks. I'm having a cacao drink. I'm having beetroot lattes. I'm making some hibiscus teas with mint and clove. I'm really experimenting with my hot drink in the morning. But I'd love your thoughts on coffee, and particular the ingredient of concern for some people, which is caffeine. Because again, in a similar way to alcohol, you get some divisive views. Some people think it's a fantastic ingredient. Some people think that the caffeine negates the benefits of the coffee polyphenols in yourself. What is Dr. William Lee's take on coffee?
All right. I'm going to confess I am somebody who loves coffee. I grew up as with an Asian background in a family that drank tea all the time, green tea, oolong tea. I was around. My parents,
Mm.
my grandparents, they drank 6 to 10 cups easily a day. You could never find them without a cup of tea. But when I went to college, I started drinking coffee, and I drank it, kind of to stay up to do my homework and study for exams. That changed for me actually because I did it before I went to medical school to get, to learn medicine. I did a gap year, and in my gap year, what I set out to do was to study the connection between food, health, and culture. That was something that's always interested me personally. So I spent a
Mm.
year doing that in Italy and in Greece. And so this was long before people talked about the Mediterranean diet. I was just naturally curious about this intersection of culture and food and health. And the first thing I noticed was the difference in the way that people drank coffee there. And so something that was sort of a side habit in college suddenly became something that I learned. You know, you could become an aficionado. You could actually become sort of a true student of coffee, and you could taste the
Mm,
differences. So I developed a lifelong habit of having an espresso or two in the morning,
mm.
occasionally a cappuccino, and then I would drink coffee throughout the day. Of course, in med school, all the time I drank coffee.
Yeah.
Probably not very good quality coffee. In fact, definitely not very good quality coffee. But now in my home, I actually do like coffee. So let's circle back. You know, now that I've actually made my confession
Yeah.
to Father Rupee, I will I will now tell you that as a Buddhist medicine researcher, coffee, like wine, is goes way back. In fact, the we don't even know where the origins of coffee came from, other than probably around Ethiopia and that part of Africa
Mm,
at some point where the coffee plant naturally grew. And coffee was, cooked in different ways. I mean, prepared in different ways. You could boil the green coffee beans, you could roast them. What we see now at the coffee at the cafe, what the baristas actually do, or what you might do in your own little, kitchen espresso maker, totally different than how traditional coffee was actually made. Um, uh, and so there's so many ways of doing it. You get largely the same flavors, and you get different
mm.
amounts of caffeine. I'm going to talk about caffeine in a second, but I'm putting this cultural context around it,
Mm.
so people don't feel like, again, this whole paternalistic, judgmental character
Yeah.
assassination. There's a real component to this. I remember when I went to um, uh, Italy for the first time and lived there. I was amazed that depending on how finely you ground the coffee, the taste would change, and the amount of caffeine that you would actually get also
Yeah.
changed completely. And then I was uh, dumbstruck, uh, and I think you would say gobsmacked when when I went to Greece and I watched people just dump coffee grounds into a container. They would just boil and then pour the whole thing into the cup, and you'd be drinking the coffee grounds.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, that's amazing because you get this giant hit of caffeine, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Greek coffee is like the equivalent of matcha tea. You're just drinking everything. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the fact of the matter is that caffeine is very much part of the neuroactivating components of coffee that we tend to assign to coffee. But going
Mm.
way back to the origins of this beverage, which we don't really know about, but it really again transcends different cultures where the plant was encountered or beans were traded. Not so much in Asia, but mostly in sort of the European side. I think Asia was mostly tea. The fact of the matter is that this became one of the common beverages, after drinking water, that was consumed.
Mm.
The amount of caffeine is what we attribute it to, but there's many other polyphenols, and even some dietary fiber that's found in the coffee bean. And depending on whether you filter it and how finely you ground it, you get other benefits. So look, I want to come back to caffeine in a second because that's what everybody thinks about. But a lot of people don't
Yeah.
know this. But coffee contains a natural bioactive, a natural chemical from Mother Nature's pharmacy with an F, not a PH. That's called
Yeah.
chlorogenic acid. Chlorogenic acid. All right. And chlorogenic acid does a lot of great things for our body. Number one, it promotes a healthy circulation. All right. It
Mm.
helps the lining of our blood vessels, the endothelium, function better. Chlorogenic acid in the lab has also been shown to actually cut off the blood supply to cancer. So it actually can sort of act as a volume switch to control where the healthy blood vessels are growing. So that's a really good thing. Chlorogenic acid also helps promote our stem cells for recovery. So it actually helps us, our stem cells, repair our own body from the inside out. Chlorogenic acid also is a prebiotic for our gut bacteria. Healthy gut, healthy body, healthy immune system, healthy brain, coming from a cup of coffee. That has nothing to do with caffeine. All right. Chlorogenic
Mm.
acid, powerful antioxidant to protect us from environmental exposures to the chemicals that we might have from our water bottles, from the off-gassing of our carpet, from the ultraviolet radiation from the sun. Chlorogenic acid is protective against that, like many other bioactives. And then chlorogenic acid also lowers inflammation,
Mm.
improves immunity, and it actually triggers our metabolism to burn down harmful body fat. So, in fact, it's good for our metabolism as well. And studies have actually shown that coffee or chlorogenic acid in the lab and in clinic and caffeine, but also caffeine free coffee will do the same thing, will help you burn down excess harmful body fat. So, all this to say that there is a plethora of natural
Mm.
chemicals that food as medicine people are studying. Oh, and one more thing I got to tell you. Why do why does coffee even have why does a coffee bean even contain caffeine and chlorogenic acid? All right, here's the thing. Tea also contains some caffeine, right? So if you were a botanist, and I've spoken to many in my research, I was amazed to learn that tea and coffee plants both produce caffeine because caffeine made by naturally by the plant is a natural pesticide, insecticide. So
Ah, oh,
bugs, it
interesting.
keeps away the bugs from ravaging the coffee plant. The later in the season you harvest the bean, deeper into the summer when the bugs and the gnats and the flies and everything are flying all around, they produce more and more caffeine.
Ah,
Okay,
gotcha.
so late
Ah,
harvest
that's
picks
so
have much more
interesting.
caffeine. Right now, same as chlorogenic acid, but for a different reason. Chlorogenic acid, again, I learned this from a botanist and then really dug into it myself. And eureka, like the light bulb goes in my head, like, oh, I really get that now. So, chlorogenic acid is a natural substance made by the plant as a wound healing response. And you might say, what do you mean?
Ah,
Well, look, when you actually grow a plant in a natural way, no pesticides, the
mm,
bugs are out there. The coffee is going to make more caffeine to keep the bugs down, protect them. The bugs are going to say, I don't want to be eating that. But then, but there some will get through, and the bugs nibble on the leaves and the stems of the coffee plant, and as a result of that injury to the leaf or the stem, the plant heals itself with chlorogenic acid. So it produces
gotcha.
more. So when you actually are having organic coffee grown without pesticides, you will actually get more chlorogenic acid. In fact, up to threefold more chlorogenic acid than coffee beans grown in a conventional pesticide
Mm,
setting. So, not just less of the bad stuff, nobody wants pesticides in their coffee, but more of the good stuff. And that's what that would excite me. That would give me reason to invest in organic coffee.
yeah, absolutely. And so, your thoughts specifically on caffeine,
Hmm.
it's wonderful to know that that's the original sort of pesticide, if you will, and that's the actual reason why coffee has caffeine in itself. And I think there's just so many interesting chemicals of interest that have their roots in the plant defense system. In terms of the caffeine content, it sounds as if you opt for caffeine free, you're still going to get a lot of the benefits. For some people, I imagine caffeine is an issue. And what would you say? Would you say there are some extra benefits if you have some caffeinated coffee, or does it not really matter so much when ingested for users and
Yeah.
humans?
So every individual is different.
Mm,
Someone like me, I can drink a lot of coffee, and the caffeine doesn't actually I'm not that sensitive to caffeine. All right. And in
mhm.
fact, I don't drink my coffee for the caffeine. I like the taste. But for some people,
Yeah.
and I know, and I have many friends that are like this. They're exquisitely sensitive to caffeine. If they have even a sip of coffee after 5 p.m. in the afternoon, they'll be up all night. They just, maybe some of it's psychosomatic, but the bottom line is that it really agitates them. Some people who
Yeah.
have trigger happy heart rhythms like atrial fibrillation, if you drink
Mhm.
coffee with a lot of caffeine, it can trigger your AFib, which we as
Mm,
doctors know is a dangerous condition, and that you need to really try to prevent your heart from being from getting into that situation. And so another example about it could be in your brain, it could be your heart. And caffeine, by the way, is not just activating in one way. Caffeine can also actually by itself can stimulate your metabolism as well. So a little bit actually is not going to be bad for you. And when you have decaf coffee, let's say you're sensitive to caffeine, but you like the taste of coffee, definitely go for the decaffeinated.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, the way that the manufacturers do decaffeination, it's impossible to remove all the caffeine. They can remove
Yeah.
90% of it, but there's still a little tiny bit. You can still get a little bit of caffeine. And so
Yeah.
so even decaf coffee, you're getting a little bit of that. And again, caffeine is not a categorically good guy or bad guy. If your body can tolerate it, in the decaffeinated side, you're probably fine if you like the taste of coffee. If you find any amount of coffee is somehow makes you feel uncomfortable, I always tell people first and foremost, listen to your body. All right. Don't follow
Mm.
a trend or recommendation from anybody, ourselves included, if when you try
Yeah.
the food or the beverage, it makes you feel bad. That's a
Mm.
warning signal. That's a red flag, a distress signal inside your body. You should always pay heed to that.
Yeah, yeah, and it's the same with a lot of trendy ingredients. Down to traditional uses of ginger. For a lot of people, ginger is quite an irritant to people's heart rhythms. They feel hot, flustered. Same thing with mushrooms. Mushrooms are becoming very popular, but they have genuine medicinal value, and people need to be respectful of that actually, because I think shiitake, rhodiola, chaga, they're just being mixed into these concoctions without real due diligence of like how the combinations can react in certain
I,
people. So always be, yeah,
Yeah, I want to make a comment about mushrooms because I think that's
yeah,
really important. I've studied mushroom. First of all, I love to eat mushrooms. I've studied mushrooms. I like to cook mushrooms as well. And I have an opinion about the current state of mushroom or mycology. The fandom of mushrooms. Okay,
yeah,
first of all, uh, mushrooms are pretty powerful fungi. They're easiest way to think about mushrooms that there's culinary mushrooms that are used in
mm,
cooking. Your portobello, your white button mushrooms, your morels, and yes, shiitake mushroom also is a culinary mushroom. Okay,
mm,
but then there's medicinal mushrooms, and you've got your lion's mane, you've got your shaga, you've got your reishi, a whole bunch of turkey tail, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
mm,
Shiitake also falls into that category as well. Okay,
mm,
and maitake also bridges culinary and
yeah,
medicinal. But what I tell people to do is that if you're trying to incorporate mushrooms into your everyday life, think about that in the culinary sense because you're going to get the vitamin D, you're going to get the dietary fiber, the beta glucans, the healthy things that activate your body's health defenses and activate your metabolism, help you burn body fat just by having the culinary version. And I think in the, let's call it the Western world, the world of trend making and trend setting, some very excited person reached over into the canon of Asian medicinal mushrooms, okay, and started pulling out these mushrooms that were never eaten regularly, but only
mm,
used for healing purposes. And this is the reishi, the cordyceps, the turkey tail, everything, all that kind of stuff. Ganoderma lucidum. Look, it's the stuff that you can find easily on social media. You can find them actually in a grocery store now, believe it or not.
yeah,
Those contain, researchers like me have now discovered that those medicinal mushrooms contained previously undiscovered polysaccharides, peptides, and other small molecules that actually are not present in the culinary mushrooms. They're not present in the edible stuff, the portobellos, the porcinis, but they're present in these medicinal mushrooms. Medicinal mushrooms, by the way, tend to be very, very bitter. They're hard to
mm,
actually have by themselves. And so
Yeah.
And the bitter tends to be kind of a sign of a medicinal property, right? So what I
Mm.
tell people is don't mix mushrooms into one category. You got your culinary mushrooms that you could cook with every day and enjoy them and eat. Good source of dietary fiber, good for gut health, good for your metabolism. Then there are healing mushrooms, medicinal mushrooms. Take a look if you're going to do your research on these. Take a look at their traditional medicinal uses. Were they used for illnesses that were characterized by hot versus cold? The Asian way
Mm.
of thinking about it. Look at their uses in Ayurvedic medicine. They were not used on a daily basis to be ground up in your peppermill to actually put into your coffee or sprinkle on your salad.
Mm.
This is a modern translation of things that were used originally in medicine. By the way, you would not go into your medicine cabinet, okay, and take a
Yeah.
bottle of pills and open them up and put them in a spice grinder and sprinkle them on your salad either. So I would say
Yeah.
be careful with these medicinal
Yeah.
mushrooms. We don't know enough about them when they're used in the outside of the healing setting, supervised healing setting, to know what they do. So this is an area of research. I think the whole mycology field is super fascinating. We are sure to discover more health benefits from these incredible medicinal mushrooms. But I just caution people that if you want to get the real benefits of mushrooms, for the most part, you can get them just from the culinary side that you would see a home chef, your mother or your grandmother would have cooked with them.
Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to do a deep dive into that because I think it's very trendy right now. I'm very interested, but I'm also very cautious because of respect of the medicinal impact of these new and novel substances that have been used for millennia, but from a research point of view, we don't know enough about them. And I think mixing them, the analogy that you made there about mixing, medicines in your medicine cabinet, you wouldn't do that, and certainly wouldn't do that on a daily basis. I think it's certainly caution that people need to heed. So I really appreciate you talking about that. And actually, as you were talking about that, you mentioned you were a tea drinker before, so you had oolong. Matcha has caffeine in, but from anecdotes of people who are sensitive to the caffeine in coffee, but they can tolerate matcha, that there appears to be some better suitability of matcha to people who are sensitive, even though matcha, on the face of it, has similar amounts of caffeine. Are there any other elements of matcha that provide benefits, but also can explain a phenomena that I see anecdotally?
Okay, so this is what I love to talk about is the origins of food, right? So
Yeah,
what is matcha? I mean, matcha is this beautiful green powder, fine green powder that is so fine you need a whisk to really kind of get it to stir into hot water properly. That's the traditional, what they call it, ceremonial matcha. You can also buy
mm,
just simple powdered matcha. You put it into a hot water and it dissolves instantly. Okay, crystallized matcha. But here's the thing: if you understand tea, you'll realize that, and I've been actually on tea plantations in Asia. My great uncle, who
mm,
lived to 104, lived at the base of a tea mountain. So he used to take me walking around the tea
wow.
plantations. When he was in his 90s, he was walking independently and he was drinking, attributing his longevity to tea drinking. Okay,
Yeah.
so um, mostly little ladies would go out there with a bamboo hamper and pick leaves at different times of the season. In the spring, they get the early buds, which there's not many insects out, so the caffeine is low. Later on, in the summertime, and later in the summer, more bugs out there. They pick the leaves, and a second crop of picking, there's more caffeine. So again, the
Mm,
season of picking, the time in the season also matters in the amount of caffeine that's in there. Number one. So it depends on your matcha what part of the season it was picked on in terms of the quote caffeine content. Now, the
mm.
other thing about matcha is that it's quite different from loose leaf tea that you might find in a Chinese restaurant. It's very different than the tea you would have in an English afternoon tea ceremony, in a tea in a bag, or steeped
Yeah.
tea, where you get the pure liquid but you don't see the leaves, or you have the dunking bags. Okay. Now, matcha is actually the powder. How is matcha made? Well, about 3 weeks before harvest, in Japan, where the original matcha was methodology was developed, they throw a canopy over the leaves so that they don't get direct sun anymore. That canopy or shade mellows out the strong flavors of tea. Okay, we don't know exactly
Ah,
how, but it changes the chemical makeup to make it a little bit more mellow, right? Less direct sunshine. You don't need as much sunscreen. Your skin's not going to react as much. That's what they do. They actually put a canopy over to shade the matcha plant. I want to say it's 21 days or 20 days before harvest. And then when they pick them, they take the leaves, they dry them. Okay, they're dried in the open air, and then they kind of roast them very, very slightly. They're not oxidized. All right, most tea, especially English breakfast tea, or Earl Grey, highly oxidized. So it's a processing. The processing changes the flavor, alters the chemical structure, the chemicals in them a little bit. But for matcha, they don't really, really oxidize it deeply. Then they ground the entire leaf into this powder. So, whereas if you are steeping tea in a bag or in a pot, you are not getting any
yeah.
of the leaf. There's no fiber.
Mm,
You're not getting all of the
mm,
polyphenols. You're just getting whatever dissolves out into the water.
yeah.
For matcha, you are getting every bit of fiber that's in the tea leaf. That fiber means that you are actually activating your gut microbiome. It is a powerful prebiotic that feeds your gut microbiome. So matcha is much more gut healthy than other teas because you're getting that
Mm,
big bolus of fiber. It also contains all of the polyphenols. You're not leaving it to chance that some of it might dissolve out, some of it might be stuck in the leaf, right? In the tea bag. You throw the tea bag away, you're throwing away some polyphenols. Here, you're grounding everything and you're drinking
mm,
everything. Now you're getting the full dose, everything that tea plant can actually contribute to you. And in addition to the catechins and the theaflavins and the theobromines and all these other things that are found in tea that can activate other parts of your brain, other parts of your metabolism, other parts of your body's health defenses. You're just getting more with matcha because of the nature of what it's at. So if you ever go to a Japanese restaurant and you're sitting at the sushi bar and they ask you and they want some green tea, oftentimes they'll pour you some matcha tea, and you
yeah.
know you're getting really high test stuff. Matcha is the espresso of tea.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I love matcha. My wife has recently moved on to matcha from her coffee, her two coffees in a day, and she's really enjoying it. And there's just so much, ceremony around it. They're just the ritual, the smell, the different qualities, and it's just again another world of flavor that people can really lean into, and also rest in the knowledge that it's actually providing all those wonderful benefits that you were just talking about to the gut and the other chemicals that you consume. And we've talked about pesticides quite a bit on this, and the natural pesticides in terms of the natural chemicals that are produced by plants and how those confer benefits. But there are some people that say, in the realm of lectins, that they're deadly and that they're, not something that we should be consuming, or high lectin foods. Um, I wonder what your thoughts on that are, because a lot of the healthy foods that I consume would be considered high lectin, and a lot of the foods that you talk about as well might be considered high lectin. So there are thoughts on that, and again, this is an open discussion. I would love your thoughts on lectins.
Yeah. Okay. Lectins have become known in the public as sort of a harmful, deadly aspect of foods you must avoid. And I can tell you that nothing could be further from the truth. And the reason I say that with authority is that as a researcher, I study blood vessels and I study the body and I study what's inside the body. Our own body is filled with lectins. There are hundreds and hundreds of different kinds of lectins. You can't, you can't just say that lectins are bad for you. You must stay away from them because they're filled. Our bodies they're inside our body. In fact, lectins inside our
Mm,
body are part of the connective tissue that hold us together. They are like the grout between bricks on the brick wall They help us. They help our cells stick together. They help us function. If you want your teeth to stick into your jaw and not fall out, you need lectins.
Mm.
So every aspect of our body will have lectins. And listen, as a researcher, we stain for lectins. We know this because we do special stains for lectins when we're studying human cells or animal cells, and you can see them everywhere. Okay, and
Mm.
they are performing important biological healthful functions. Form and function are what lectins actually do. Now, there
Mm.
are similarly, if they're present in humans, they're probably present in our food system as well. They're present in animal food, seafood, poultry, livestock. They're also present in plant-based foods because they hold things together. They're not the only thing to hold things
Mm.
together, but they hold things together. Now, of the hundreds and hundreds of different types of lectins, indeed, there are a few, that are actually deadly poisons. And you can order them from a chemical warehouse if you're studying those poisons. All right. But they are not the things that you would find in the grocery store or the farmer's market. I want to really
Mm.
kind of take down everybody's anxiety and do a reset. So if you were a laptop, I would just, control shift and reboot you, hard reboot, okay, to say, lectins are inside us. They're perfectly fine. They're everywhere. There are some poisonous lectins, but they're not in your tomatoes. They're not in your eggplants. And, it's one of these urban legends. I want to say, Rupi, that probably, and I like to think the positively of most people, probably
Mm.
some well-intentioned person read about lectins as a poison and then started to do their research and found, oh my gosh, tomatoes have lectins. Oh my gosh, all these other
Mm.
foods have lectins. Well, then they just started to connect the dots. Uh, I would say inadvertently, assigning a negative attribute without understanding the all the details between the different families of lectins that are out there. Same thing, by the way, happens with phytoestrogens in plants like
Yeah.
soy. Some well-intentioned person said, "Oh, human breast cancers are estrogen sensitive. Some are human estrogen sensitive, and soy has phytoestrogens." They ignore the phyto part. They're estrogen, estrogen. Wow, must avoid estrogens. We would never do this as sort of scientists or physicians. If you actually look at the
Mm.
chemical structure, they don't look anything the same. Plant phytoestrogens block human estrogens, just like Mother Nature's tamoxifen. For those of you who are familiar with, hormonal
Yeah.
therapy for breast cancer. So, again, one of the things that I think is so important that your podcast is able to do is to surface these controversial topics and bring out people who are able to who study them and who are able to bring a different perspective to help clear up the confusion. And in some cases, if there's an urban legend, kind of a false notion, a commonly held false notion, just to clear that up, do the reset so that people don't fear their food. I think there's way too much fear about food. It's
Yeah.
not it doesn't help us embrace the healthful properties of what we can get in the kitchen.
Yeah, and looking at this from a much broader picture, and this is what I love about your work and the content that you're putting out. We're trying to actually widen the palette of the entire population because right now the commonly consumed foods are around 10 to 12 and they're very very similar. So actually what we need is diversity. So we should be leaning into all these incredible foods, the nightshade family, the legumes, the green brassica vegetables, the herbs and spices. This is super, super important for us to do on a much grander scale. So, and I agree. I think it is likely well intentioned, but now is the time to do the reset. So that's definitely something that we're pushing over here on the podcast as well.
Well, and
Um,
I'll also tell you that if you look at these so-called blue zones, they, where
mm,
people live long and live well, okay, or live well as they age as long as possible. I heard that in Okinawa, which is one of the blue zones, there's like a 90-year-old lady female rock band that goes on tour. That's how healthy these people are. Beyond the obvious thing that they're eating a lot of plants and they're exercising, they've got good social structure. is the fact that the healthiest parts of the world happen to come from some of the healthiest cultures of the traditional cultures of the
Mm,
world, which is in Asia and in the Mediterranean. Asia is not one country or a few countries. Asia is a whole plethora of countries, dozens of countries, as is the Mediterranean, all the countries surrounding the Mediterranean Sea. So if you take
mm,
a look at how people, societies in those areas of the world have lived for generations, maybe hundreds of years. Think about it. I mean, have you ever been back to your ancestral land, or I've been back to China?
absolutely,
If you
yeah.
go, if you go back there and you go out to a restaurant or you eat at someone's home, or you have somebody come over to help you prepare some food, every day is a different cornucopia of ingredients and flavors.
Yeah.
People don't do the
Mm,
same thing. They don't rinse and repeat every single day like we often do in modern Western countries. Same soup and salad, the same veggies over and over and over again. Diversity not only is beneficial for the soul and beneficial for our brain, because diversity actually exercises our brain. When you're recognizing different foods, it's a brain workout. So you don't have to go to the gym. You can just go
yeah.
to the kitchen to get a little brain workout every day. But it's also good for our gut. Our gut microbiome craves diversity. The more diverse foods you eat, the more diversity, the more the ecosystem of our gut fleshes itself out, which ultimately helps us lower inflammation in our body. So something easy, which is to actually eat a lot of different things that are good for you, actually we get the payoff from inside our gut.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important message to get out there that the diversity is the one thing that I would say people really need to invest a lot more time in. And just having spent time in India, exactly that, they eat according to the seasons. They have herbs and spices. They have, yes, traditional recipes, but they're always just constantly on their feet and thinking about ways in which to combine different foods. Um, and on that vein, I love this discussion. I just love having an open discussion about all these different topics because they're just so important. One of the things that I feel again on two in two areas is misinformed is the healthfulness of oils. So there's a camp that suggests that we shouldn't be having any oils whatsoever because they are refined, they are processed, they are very high in fat, high in calories, etc., etc. So that's one camp. We shouldn't be eating oils at all. There's another camp that reasonably have suggested seed oils are not healthy for us, and there are plenty of different seeds. We have rapeseed in the UK, also known as canola, sunflower oil, pumpkin oils. There's also super healthy oils, extra virgin olive oils. There's ghee, there's traditional fats that we tend to use in cooking. I would love to know Dr. William Lee's take on those different topics. Oils, are they healthy, and which ones, if they are healthier?
Okay. Look, oils are all fats, and our body needs some fats, but not too many fats. So, regardless of which fat you choose, if you have too much of it, it's going to overload your body. The way that we started this
Mm-hmm.
conversation talking about overload of sugars and carbs, listen, we
Mm-hmm.
need sugars, we need carbs to run our engine the Ferrari of our body. We need that. And we need oil too. We need some fats, but if you overload on it, you're going to run into trouble. Okay. So, that said, I will tell you that the oils that I like to use in my own kitchen, I think we've had this conversation before, but I really cook with two types of oil. I like to cook with olive oil. Extra virgin olive
Mm.
oil is my preferred, and I also will enjoy extra virgin olive oil uncooked, like outside of cooking, but I also cook with it as well. I'm always mindful of how much oil I use. All right, and I
Mm.
never deep fry things because that's just automatically inviting a huge amount of oil. That's just my preference in my kitchen. I will use avocado oil as well. That's also a healthful oil, and it's very light, and you can actually cook at high heat. I like to cook in different techniques. And so I like to use oils that are able to actually take high heat, like avocado oil can be cooked at a higher temperature than olive oil. Olive oil, by the way, can also be cooked at high temperature. That's also a little bit of a
Yeah.
urban legend,
Yeah.
but it has a lot of extra flavor to it that avocado oil doesn't. Now, both of those happen to be healthier oils, but again, the quantity, the amount is important. Now, when it comes to olive oil, most of the studies, epidemiology studies, looking at the correlation between the association between olive oil and health has shown, people who have olive oil, who use olive oil, consume olive oil, are healthier than people who don't consume olive oil. Well,
Mm.
how much is the dose? I'm always into the food dose. The healthy amounts tend to revolve around 3 tablespoons of olive oil a day, generally. Now, I don't recommend that people go out and take a measuring spoon and drink that. I know some people hearing this are going to go immediately, I'm going to go out and buy a measuring spoon for olive oil. Look, if you cook foods using olive oil, try not to use more than 3 tablespoons. Or if you do, try to drain the oil so you're not getting too much more than that. So that's kind of like the reasonable man's way or reasonable person's way of looking at this. Okay, so we know olive oil is healthy for you. It's a
Mhm.
healthier fat. It also has lots of bioactives, which give you the flavor of the olives, the back of the throat
Mm.
taste for olive oil. That's because it's still got an extra virgin means that it's not filtered. You're getting the little bits of the
Mm.
olive. Again, like wine, you're getting the kind of the good stuff from the plant itself. It's not the fat, it's actually the stuff that is floating around in there. Extra virgin olive oil. Avocados have something called avocatin B that's also present in the flesh and therefore in a little bit in the oil that activates your metabolism. So not only do you get some healthier fats, you also get some extra bioactives as well. That's one way to think about these oils. Now, back to your question about like unhealthy oils.
Mm.
My This is my feeling is that because I'm very reluctant to do character assassination of foods. All right. Oh, nut oils are bad. Let's put a scarlet A on all of them, and then let's
Yeah.
imprison them all. I don't go for that. I would say that if you are using any oil in moderation, it's probably fine. Be very
Mm.
careful about saturated fats. But even for that, the jury is still out about ghee. I mean,
Yeah.
ghee might appears to be a healthier way of using. The clarified butter is better because of the
Mm.
clarification process. We're still actively researching this, so I think that a lot of the stuff out there in in social media and on the internet that categorically denounce one entire category of food on the basis of a theory is probably the kind of the premature death kind of concept. I think I would stick with the things that we know are beneficial, consume those
Yeah.
in moderation, and then try not to overload on anything. Because by the way, let's say you found this magic oil, health oil that's good for you, you still wouldn't want to drink that, consume that in large quantities anyway every day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's definitely the heuristic that I use myself. I go for the oils that are appropriate for the cuisine. I go for the oils that I know have health benefits attached to them. I think there's a demonization of seed oils right now. I personally just don't like the flavor of
Yeah.
quite refined seed oils. Other than if I'm making a chili oil, so it's just an easier fat to
Yeah.
use when you take it to a high temperature. I haven't tried it with avocado oil though, so I might
Give
I
it
might
give
actually
it a,
try that
give
in
it a
the
shot.
kitchen.
Give it a shot.
I will, yeah, yeah. I'll let you know when you're in the studio next time. Maybe you could
We'll
try it on
we'll
something
we'll
that I
make we'll
prepare.
we'll, we'll do a chili oil taste test with different
Yeah,
oils.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You mentioned one thing, organic, earlier when you were talking about coffee, and you prefer to go organic with coffee. What are your thoughts on organic versus conventional produce? Because we just did a podcast on organic versus conventional, and my my personal stance has changed. I'm leaning more toward organic, but it is fraught with difficulty and inconsistencies within the research itself. But it feels like there is a bit of a turning point at a agricultural level, at a governmental policy level, where they're more appreciative of organic, which I think was previously seen as a bit conspiratorial. I wonder if your thoughts have morphed or changed, or whether you're either pro or against organic foods.
Yeah, again, I've been learning along the way, as you have, about organic. I originally, when the concept of organic first came out, and I think it was in the 90s, we started seeing this more commonly, certainly in the United States. I actually rebelled against organic. And the reason was I was seeing all these beautiful foods that, looked like they were painted by, Rembrandt, and they were super expensive. And I just thought, and the argument was you get less pesticides by grown more naturally, and I just felt bad. I literally had this internal revulsion about paying more money for less harmful ingredients or
Mm,
chemicals. Why would I want to do that? Like what kind of sick world are we in where we actually have to pay more for less harmful things? But I have actually changed my mind because over time the botanists have actually been educating me about, as we were talking about with coffee, the role of a plant living in its natural ecosystem that's unperturbed by artificial
mm,
chemicals. All right. And so I thought about it less from the health side. I learned about it from the plant side. I'm one of these really curious people. So when somebody is an expert in something that I happen to encounter, I want to know everything about it. And so the botanist told me, the best way for a plant to grow, for a fruit or vegetable that we eat, the edible part to be produced, is really to grow with natural sunlight, with natural rain, with natural soil irrigation, and surprisingly to me, with natural insects. So you've got
mm,
and other creatures. So by the way, you've got the microbiome of the soil. We think about gut
mm,
microbiome, but there's actually a microbiome of the soil. There's also a microbiome that grows around the plants itself, natural bacteria on the plants. Yeah, you're rinsing off for 60 seconds, and when you take the plant home, you think you're getting rid of all that bacteria. Nope. We are eating. Most of these vegetables are slightly probiotic. All right, but the bacteria on the plants actually play a huge role. But these insects that we don't see, and if we saw them, we probably wouldn't want to see them for most of us, that are flying around, crawling around, nibbling on the leaves and the stems. This is the whole thing. Most of the insects don't, birds will eat the fruit or eat, but
mm,
insects actually eat the leaves. They like the leaves more. Okay. And so they nibble on the leaves, they nibble on the stems, and a universal part of plant biology seems to be when grown in the most natural setting, which is better for the plant, that the plant's reaction to wounding by having these little nibbles and injuries is to produce more polyphenols, more bioactives,
ah,
more chlorogenic acid. In the case of strawberries,
mm,
which was published in the journal Nature, organic strawberries compared to grown without pesticides, compared to strawberries grown with pesticides, the plants definitely looked better when there's pesticides used because you got the leaves are intact, there are fewer bugs. There were
yeah,
more fruits that were harvestable because the yield was better because there was less bugs nibbling on the plant. But when you looked inside each strawberry, the ellagic acid, which is one of the bioactives found in strawberries, was in the organic part was 30% higher because the ellagic acid is produced by the plant as a wound healing response to heal that area that the bug nibbled on. They make more ellagic acid,
mm,
like the coffee plant makes more chlorogenic acid. Um, okay, and so as I started to realize that this was a universal phenomenon, it's the same thing for brassica. You actually have, leafy greens, kale, grown in an organic environment. you're going to get more of the sulforaphanes that are beneficial for every aspect, every defense system in our body and our metabolism. I started to realize that this discovery of nature, you know how like Darwin discovered, natural selection by going to the Galapagos and looking at finches and turtles and things like that? Well, look, botanists are really discovering another part of how nature has developed a program to protect plants that are growing in the most natural environment. By the way, the other thing that has made me more, given me higher affinity for organic growing, okay, I still have a little bit of catch in my chest when I think about paying a lot more money. And so that price has to
Sure.
come down. The governments need to
Mm.
make the price come down. But also pesticides are not good for our planet. They're not good for our soil. All right. And in some cases, like a strawberry, for example, or an apple or a peach, the pesticides that are sprayed on actually penetrate the skin. You cannot wash those off. All right. I mean, think about how
Mm.
you ever try skinning a strawberry? Forget about it. All right. It never happened. And you're getting like there's I think one study by the University of Massachusetts showed if you spray with pesticides, 20% it'll penetrate the pesticide will penetrate 20% into the skin and stay there. You
Yeah.
cannot wash it off.
Mm.
You know, that's enough to convince me that like I'm not for especially the thin skin fruits and vegetables. I think I want more of the good stuff, the good polyphenols. And
Yeah.
I definitely don't want to be eating those artificial chemicals. We now know that that stuff is going to be bad for our gut microbiome. We know the gut microbiome and gut health protects brain health, protects, immune health, lowers inflammation. So I don't want to go there.
Just a quick one. If you're enjoying this content, you will love my mini series on inflammation. I go through the different types of foods that you should be having, what inflammation actually is, plus lifestyle practices to reduce inflammation. You can get it for free right now in the link in the caption below. Back to the podcast. Yeah, I think there's a lot more reasonable approaches now to any exogenous chemicals, including plastics that unfortunately are littered throughout our produce and our bodies as well. There was a study, I think, looking at the quantity of plastic consumed in a typical year in Europeans, and it was around the size of a credit card every single day. And I think there's more and more research looking at the negative effects of plastics in general, and I guess pesticides as well. And I guess we really want to take that pragmatic approach, the precautionary approach before we sort of allow the contamination of our food supply chain with these chemicals without like due diligence of what the long-term consequences are.
Well, and this is where policy, I don't like to get into public conversations about, one side of the fence or the other side politically. But I will say,
Sure.
anybody who's listening to this or watching this, if you have a voice to support officials who are making governmental policies or rules that help to make our planet healthier, it's likely to also make our bodies healthier as well. To me, if you only had one reason to vote in a positive direction, regardless of what it
Mm.
is, vote for yourself because that's that's like I always vote for myself, and I think that that's the reason we need planetary policies. It's not about the country; it's about the whole planet. Better for the planet, better for the plant, better for the plant, better for our person. That's just how
Mm.
it works.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get around to some quick fire questions because I know my audience are dying to ask you a few of these topics around fat burning foods. Now, we talked about coffee. I know that's one of your favorite ingredients. What are, let's say, 3 or 4 of your favorite fat burning foods? And perhaps we should preface this. I know I just said quick fire, but perhaps we should preface it by what we mean by fat burning foods as well.
Okay. So earlier we were talking about the body like your car that you
Mm.
are filling up with fuel. The car uses petrol, the body uses food to get its fuel. Whatever you eat is going to be turned into fuel. That fuel gets stored in our muscles and in our body fat. Okay, and many people don't realize this, but I wrote about this in my book, Eat to Beat Your Diet, that our in your car, your fuel tank is on the side of the car, and you put the petrol into a little through the nozzle into a little hole, and you fill it up. The tank fills up with petrol, and then the nozzle goes click, and now you can't put any more in there. And then you put it away, and you drive off into the sunset. Okay. Now, in the body, what actually happens is that we are pulling over not to the petrol station, we're pulling over to the kitchen table, and we're loading up on our fuel. Our conversation we're having is to please load up on higher quality fuel, because whether regardless of what you believe, your body is a Ferrari. So please take care of it as you would the rate to make your car the race, make your body the race car it is. That fuel goes into your fat, is stored in your fat. Our fat cells, which are called adipocytes, are actually fuel storage tanks. And actually, those fuel storage tanks formed when we were still in our mother's womb, okay, in the uterus, right next to blood vessels. So, most people don't realize this because when you step out of the shower and out of the corner of your eye, you see, a lump or a bump under your arm or the muffin top or under your chin. You don't like that. That's not where fat started in your body. That healthy fat that's our fuel tank started when your dad's sperm met your mom's egg and you were just a ball of cells. Blood vessels were first formed, nerves were formed next. You need circulation, you need electrical signals to power your organs. And then the third important organ that formed was body fat. These adipose tissues formed like bubble wrap around blood vessels. They wrapped around the blood vessel, right? And so people who are listening will go, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. I don't have fat around my blood vessel. Yes, you do. That's where they formed. And the reason that fat first formed around blood vessels is because when you eat food, the fuel goes into your circulation, your bloodstream, and you need to be able to put the fuel into the fuel tank, which are your fat cells, the adipocytes. So naturally, it makes sense to put the fuel tank right next to where the fuel is running through. Okay. Now, when we go about our ordinary day with normal body weight, this is what's happening. We eat, we store fuel. When we're eating, our body is focused on storing fuel. When we're not eating, including intermittently fasting when we're sleeping, our metabolism switches gears like in a car, and now we're focused on burning fuel. So yes, we do burn fat. We do burn fuel from our fat while we're sleeping. You're not working out. You're not exercising. You're not swimming. You're not lifting. Okay, you're not doing anything exertional. You're sleeping, and your metabolism burning body fat. Okay. Now this is how we're hardwired. Eat, load up fuel. We're focusing on loading up fuel, just like when you're at the gas station. What do you do when you're at the gas station? You turn off the engine. Don't burn the fuel while you're filling up the tank, right? Okay. So, but what do you do when you're done filling up the tank? Turn the car back on and go. So when we're not actually loading up on fuel, we're burning it. That's how our body is hardwired. Now, what happens if we all ate the perfect amount every day, just what our body needed? They call it eucaloric. All right, eucaloric means you're not getting too much, you're not getting too little. This would be the idealistic, calorie in, calorie out. If that's all you cared about, you didn't have one extra calorie in that you didn't burn that day. It's a complicated mathematical equation, and it's not practical and it's not healthy. But if you did that, you wouldn't need to burn. I mean, you would be burning all the fat from your fuel that you need. You never accumulate any extra fat. Okay, you'd have just the right amount of body fat. That's not reality. In reality, Rupi, and every one of your listeners and viewers knows this, we sometimes eat too much, and we sometimes don't eat the right things. All those things conspire to putting more fuel, more low-quality fuel into our body. And what does our body have to do? That's loading into our fuel tanks, which is into our fat. Now, because our fat gets loaded up, we can fill up our fuel tanks pretty large. Unlike a car, which has a metal fuel tank, you can't overflow it. If you didn't have the clicker on the fuel tank, what would happen? You fill up the tank. If it kept on overloading, It would run right out of the car, down the side of the car, along the wheels. It'd pool around your feet. And what would happen? You'd be standing at the petrol station in a pool of a dangerous, toxic, flammable mess. Same
Mm.
thing in the body. If we overloaded our fuel, unfortunately, our body isn't hardwired with a clicker. Okay, our body is designed by evolution to give us store as much fuel as possible because we did not always live in a land of abundance where you can drive down to the corner convenience store to buy something to eat. We used to have to like work pretty hard to get our fuel. So if you had it, you ate it. Now, here's the deal. Day after day, week after week, month after month, if we're actually overloading on fuel, a fat cell, a adipocyte, can expand from its normal state 3 times, 300% its size. Small fat cells or fuel tank can get big fuel tank. Think about it like a water balloon, right? You remember when you were a kid at a birthday party, you take a small balloon, you could blow it up much larger, okay? And it feels kind of tenuous. It's sloshing around. You know, if you dropped it, it would actually explode. You have to be careful with your big water balloons. That's what happens when we overload in our fuel, okay? And poor quality fuel will actually allow it to spend even faster. Now, in our body, we can overload and spill out our fuel. That happens when your fat cells are like way overloaded. But our body has this unique ability to make more fuel tanks. Your car can't do it, but our
Mm.
body can. So if you load up on a fat cell and it's completely full, that water balloon stretched to the hilt, just tie it off, and now you got to get a new one on there. That's what our body does. Our body uses stem cells, adipocyte stem cells. It just grows more fat, grows new fuel tanks. That new fuel tank, now you can fill that up. Now you can fill up 3 times larger than it's supposed to be, tie it off. Oh, you're still eating more calories? Let's go take some more fat and make some more fat. So this idea that I went to medical school with, like you're born with all the fat cells you ever have, and they just
Mm.
get bigger, wrong. We now know we can make more and more fat. So you can see now, and I'm hoping that the listeners are getting this. If you have years, a lifetime of overloading your fuel into your fuel tanks and your body's making more fuel tanks, you are just going to have a larder and a large supply of fat. You've got more fuel than you need and you're carrying it around. All right. And that's
Mm.
why people actually grow this very harmful body fat. And by the way, if you keep on overloading it, keep on overloading it, keep on overloading it, at some point your body's fat system gives up. They're like, all right, I cry uncle. We can't take this anymore. And then you know what the fat does from those fuel tanks? It leaks out. And when fat
Yeah.
leaks out, okay, it leads to something called lipotoxicity because fat itself, when it comes out, is toxic. All right, like the fuel that comes out of your gas tank, lipo and your body races in an emergency like a fire engine, like a firehouse to put out a fire to try to deal with that. And the body's fire department to try to put out lipotoxicities in the liver. So the fat gets sequestered, trapped in the liver, okay? And now the liver becomes fatty liver. And so, as you know, we know as doctors, one of the silent epidemics in modern society is non
Mm.
alcoholic fatty liver disease. And it's due to overload, fuel overload over the course of a lifetime of eating ultra processed foods, overloading on calories, not getting enough exercise, putting poor quality of fuel into our bodies. This is what we're paying with in terms of the health of people in society today. Okay, so back to
Mm.
the original question. How do you actually reverse that? How do you prevent that? How do you deal with, many of us are walking around probably with a lot of extra fuel tank in our body. Well, the good news is our body is also hardwired to burn down body fat. If we eat the right foods, Mother Nature's pharmacies, some of these bioactives like chlorogenic acid, we talked about, ellagic
Mm.
acid, we talked about, anthocyanins in blueberries and strawberries and blackberries that give them their color, the natural dye, quercetin in onions, allicin in garlic, hydroxytyrosol in extra virgin olive oil. Okay. And I don't want to overwhelm people with chemical names. I just want you to know that we're making these discoveries in modern food as medicine research to find out that
Mm.
these natural chemicals found in the foods that we eat, more when the food is grown in an organic setting because of the nibbling of the bugs, okay, more of
Yeah.
the good stuff, they actually can trigger your body to burn down extra fuel, burn down body fat. Now, how do they do that? There's a lot of different ways to burn down extra body fat. One of the most surprising to me as I was doing my research is that many of these plant-based bioactives, and by the way, I know, of course, we want to emphasize the importance of eating produce, but even fish
Mm.
containing omega-3 fatty acids, and you can get omega-3s from, to a much lesser extent, from eating plant-based foods, but omega-3s, okay, will also do this, will trigger a kind of fat in your body that is not wiggly jiggly, not unsightly, not disgust provoking, does not cause the number in your scale to increase, but it is a kind of fat that is a hero kind of fat. So there's good fat and bad fat you want to in our body. And the first, let me tell you, the good fat is called brown fat. Brown fat is actually the color of the fat. First, brown fat is not close to the skin, therefore you can't see it under the chin. You can't see it under the arm. You can't, it's not your muffin top. It's not on your thighs. It's not on your butt. All right. So brown fat is not there. The hero fat, brown fat, is not close to the skin. It's close to the bone, deep
Mm.
around your neck, under your breastbone, a little bit in your belly, a little bit behind your shoulder blades. In fact, if you were to actually scan the body to look for where the brown fat is, it's kind of like a girdle that sits around our chest area and around our neck, close to the bone. All right. Now, what does brown fat do? Well, brown fat it does something called thermogenesis. Its job is
Mm.
to fire up like the gas range on in your kitchen if you cook with gas. So what happens when you actually cook with gas, right? You want to heat some soup up, you put the pot on the stove, you turn on the handle, you go click, 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 whoosh. Now you got the flame. Now you're heating up the stove. That's what brown fat does. Okay. When you
Mm.
turn on brown fat and these plant-based bioactives like ellagic acid, chlorogenic acid, quercetin, lycopene, tomatoes and onions and strawberries and blueberries and blackberries and sulforaphanes like kale, cabbage, all those kinds of things. Click, 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 whoosh. They turn on your brown fat. They turn on the fire of your brown fat. Thermogenesis means making heat. Thermo, heat,
Mm.
genesis, making. Brown fat does thermogenesis. Now, to make any kind of heat, you've got to actually burn fuel. Now, in a kitchen, your gas burner draws gas, okay, natural gas from a tank. Might be in the street, might be in the side of your house or your apartment, but it's drawing that fuel in. If you didn't have fuel, if the gas line wasn't there, you wouldn't be able to create the fire, the flame, right? It makes total sense. Brown fat is able to create the flame because it actually draws the fuel it needs to create heat from your white fat, from the bad fat, from the excess fat that's accumulated in your body. When your brown fat is triggered and turned on, it siphons off that harmful extra fuel that you've loaded up year after year in your body, or maybe over the holidays, and it burns it off by firing up and creating heat. All right, how does it create heat? How does it create heat? If the fuel is actually coming from harmful fat and your brown fat is like the gas burner, burning it down, consuming the fuel, all right, because you overloaded on it, how does it actually do that? What's sparking the fire? It turns out your mitochondria. Now, some people might have heard
Mm.
about the concept of mitochondria as for anti-aging and for prevent cell senescence and activating your energy. Exactly. And Rupa, you and I, when we were in med school and doing biochemistry before med school, all those recommendations, like we're studying the mitochondria, the mitochondria is the battery of all of our human cells. It's a little nuclear fuel tank. It's like a watch battery you put in your watch. It's small but mighty. It generates all the energy. Forget about the ATP and the Krebs cycle and all that kind of stuff. Most people are not going to be interested in it. I mean, I'm sure if you're like me, I'm so glad that I'm not even thinking about that stuff anymore. But I am thinking about mitochondria because brown fat has a lot of mitochondria. Now,
Mm.
mitochondria is the engine that helps to trigger the fuel to burn and create heat. Mitochondria, being the fuel cell, creates the heat to burn down the fuel. So you got to burn away harmful body fat, triggered by healthy plant-based foods and the bioactives.
Mm.
Now, why is brown fat brown? Because it turns out that mitochondria have a lot of iron in it. And iron, what happens when you have a lot of iron? You got a pile of nails made of iron, you put it out in the porch outside, it's going to happen. The silver nails turn
Mm.
brown. Indeed, brown fat has so much mitochondria to be able to fire up the gas range to burn down the extra fuel in your body that there's a lot of mitochondria with a lot of iron that oxidizes, and that's why brown fat is brown. That's why, because
Mm.
it's got these fuel tanks in it that happen to be have a lot of iron. And now you'll never forget why brown fat is brown. Okay.
Yeah.
So there are lots of foods. And in my book, Eat to Beat Your Diet, I list all the foods that can activate them. The good news is that many of these foods are those same foods that you would find in recipes you would cook from the Asian food traditions or the Mediterranean food traditions. You know, you're talking about whole plant-based foods, healthy oils, mixing them together, you know, and maybe adding a little bit of seafood once in a while, and you'll get nuts and legumes. All the things that we already know are healthy. Now we're having a new interpretation, a new, deeper understanding of, like, in addition to just, I don't know, good for gut health or making us feel a little bit better or less saturated fat or whatever. Now we know
Yeah.
that many of these foods light up our brown fat to burn down harmful white fat. And that, when you burn down the harmful white fat, by the way, this big pile of growing, this blob of white fat that grows because you're just keeping on making more and more fuel tank. As it gets
Mm.
bigger, your white fat growing blob of fuel tanks accumulating, okay, actually grow like a tumor. A tumor expands in its size, and when it eventually expands bigger than its blood supply is able to handle, the middle of it starts to die because it's not fed by, it doesn't have a circulation. Remember, we told you blood vessels
Mm.
circulation is critical for life of every organ. This fat mound is bigger than the blood supply feeding it. The inside starts to die, becomes hypoxic, not of oxygen. And so what happens is that it starts to become inflamed. That inflammation within growing mounds of fat that grows like a tumor leaks out of the mound of fat, and guess where it goes? Into your bloodstream, and now your whole
Mm.
body's inflamed, which is why we know that the condition of obesity, and even pre full on obesity, you know, if you have excess body mass, pre-diabetes, for example, large waistline, you probably have too many fuel tanks, extra fuel stored in you, okay? And you're probably leaking some of that fuel, not good for your liver, lipotoxic. You're probably also having inflammation that's leaking out from the middle. You want to activate your brown fat. You want to burn away those extra stores of fat with exercise, and, you know, like, you want to use up that fuel so that you can lower the inflammation in your body. Gut health, gut microbiome also helps to lower the inflammation as well. This is how our whole system's connected. And so, you know, people are going, well, what's the diet that I should follow like a slave in order to be able to burn
Yeah.
down my extra fat? I don't think you need to be on a diet. That's why I wrote my book, How Eat to Beat a Diet. You don't need to go on a robotic regimen. You just need to be aware that there are foods that you can eat in moderation, prepared in absolutely delicious ways, that give you diversity, that allow you to choose from the plant-based foods, whole plant-based foods, nuts and legumes, spices, and healthy oils, that allow you to do, in addition to all the other healthy things they do, they light up your brown fat to burn down the harmful fat, thereby lowering inflammation. And by the way, as a side effect of all of this, you get better metabolism and more energy. So this
Mm.
is actually the reason to do it. And you'll shrink your waistline, and you'll fit into clothing a lot better, and you'll look better, and you'll feel better, and you'll have more cognitive energy, more mental sharpness as well. This is really why the simple question of Dr. Lee, what are your favorite fat burning foods? I wanted to explain this because it's not as easy as just putting up 5 foods.
Yeah.
I could do that, but it's much more powerful to explain to people how I learned this, how I arrived at the lists of foods, and why they're actually good for you. By the way, um, tea and coffee will also activate brown fat.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I'm a big coffee and tea drinker. That's fab. And I really appreciate that response because it's really important for people to understand the mechanisms behind which food can trigger all these very, very complicated pathways that lead to ultimately improving your weight management, improving inflammation levels, preventing the diseases of modernity. But the other thing that I really appreciate about your books and your message is that these foods are super accessible as well. They don't have to be particularly exotic. They are littered across most supermarkets, and they are simple additions that are cross culinary. So onions, garlic, chili, ginger, all the other plant foods that we've already mentioned, coffee and tea. Like the surprising benefits of these everyday
And
foods.
don't forget chocolate.
Um,
And don't forget chocolate. Dark chocolate.
Chocolate as well. I will never forget chocolate. I'm a big chocolate eater myself, 85% plus, and now cacao. Actually,
Yep.
I do drink a bit of cacao every now and then. I want to bring this because this has been such a full interview, and I want to talk to you about so many other subjects, but it'll be great to do it in the kitchen where we can actually talk through different foods and show people on the channel and the podcast what we're talking about and how we would put it into a recipe. But are there any sort of ingredients on the horizon that you're getting excited about? They don't necessarily need to be exotic, but there might be foods that you perhaps haven't come across before. I'll go first. I mean, cacao for me is something that I've long enjoyed, but I haven't really been drinking it before, and I'm enjoying the process of experimenting with different flavors and putting them to a sweet drink that's actually quite bitter and actually has those health benefits of flavonoids and blood pressure lowering and all the rest of it. Are there any ingredients that you're sort of experimenting with, or perhaps you haven't come across before?
Well, I regularly experiment with different foods. So in my kitchen, mostly because I enjoy doing that for eating purposes. But some of the things that when I find that there's a food I'm playing around with that has a new property, that makes me doubly interested in it. I'll
Mm.
tell you one. There's one called the persimmon, uh,
Mm.
kaki. Yeah, I think you find in the Mediterranean. It's looks like a tomato, about the size of an apple. It's got kind of a firm skin, and it's a kind of firm fruit until it's actually really ripe, in which case it gets really soft. And the skin can be a little astringent, but when it's really ripe and soft inside, kind of like a super overripe tomato, you can cut it and literally with a spoon you can eat it like pudding. And it's
Wow.
bright red. It's incredible. It's got a very nice sweetness to it, mellow sweetness. It's not overly sweet. It's actually it's one of the national fruits, I think, of Japan.
Ah.
Persimmon, but you can find it in the Mediterranean, so it's cross-cultural. But there's carotenoids in it, lycopene, beta-cryptoxanthin. Persimmons actually have been shown to actually improve your immune system and good for your gut health, and also improve your metabolism
Ah.
by activating brown fat. Now, there's so many different ways you can eat persimmon. Like I'm still at the joyful discovery of just letting it ripen and finding different varieties and just eating it with a spoon or cutting it. Love it. But I do know that there are. I was just talking to a chef yesterday who was telling me, oh, you can make a jelly out of it. You can make a puree out of it for them. That you can put a bed of other food on top for it. So I'm designing a meal for a charity event. A good friend of mine from college
Ah.
and in New York City. It's to celebrate a dance institute that actually called City Step that brings youth and allows them to discover self-expression and creativity through body movement.
Amazing.
It's been around for 40 years. And anyway, so there's a big charity event celebration. So I designed it. They wanted to do a healthy menu in celebration of the body. And so one of the things that I wanted to throw in there is oh, I'll tell you. I wanted to throw in some persimmon. So we're going to do a salad with a kind of radicchio called Castelfranco.
Mm,
It's a very, very mild, like
nice. Oh, I love
you
that.
like that?
Yeah.
Oh man, that is it
Yeah.
is almost, it's Swedish, sweet-ish. It's very delicate. It's got beautiful little speckles of color in it.
Yeah.
It really makes a salad much more than a salad.
Yeah.
And we're gonna dress it up with some persimmon in it as well. So anyhow, so that's an ingredient that I found really new and delightful because of its health benefits. But I'll tell you, something old that has something new to it for me are strawberries. I know we've talked about strawberries a couple of times on this,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
I was astounded to learn just a few months ago that strawberries are also that we know good for immune health and inflammation, lowering inflammation and gut health, and good for your circulation. Strawberries are good for brain health as well. Brain health.
Ah,
There was a study
okay.
published by researchers from the University of Cincinnati in the United States, where they took a look at 30 people who are middle aged, men and women, with mild cognitive deficits. All right. So we're not talking about full on dementia. We're talking about people who are having real trouble
Hmm.
remembering things. Okay. If anybody listening to this, it sounds like you know, what was that again? There's a continuum. But what was interesting is they and this is a small study, but it's a clinical study. They
Hmm.
actually compared. They did two groups. One had a placebo. One had strawberries. And they took fresh, ripe strawberries. They dried them up. They crushed them into a powder, and they had them put them into a drink. So it's really 1 cup of strawberries a day. And they found after 6 weeks of eating just 1 cup of ripe strawberries a day, that memory improved in this group compared to the control, and depression and frustration due to the lack of being able to remember
Yeah.
decreased as well. And they were able to perform cognitive functions better. Strawberries, 1 cup a day.
Yeah.
That's eight
Yeah.
medium-sized strawberries. Eight,
Yeah.
right? So, like to me, like I always feel a sense of elation when there's a food that
Mm,
is accessible, that tastes good,
yeah.
that I already work with, that there's a new benefit, and you don't need to eat a lot of it. So
Yeah.
anyhow, like those are two foods that have come up recently.
I love those. I love those. Both the one like a bit more exotic and one a lot more accessible. It's great. And you know what? There's not many doctors, unfortunately, talking about this food as medicine practice, the appreciation of both the culinary and the nutritional medicine values of food. So I really appreciate your work, William. You know that we've met a number of times now on the podcast and outside of the podcast, and I'm looking forward to the next time that we'll meet in person, whether that be in the kitchen or on the podcast. Hopefully, it'll be in the kitchen because there's definitely some interesting things that we could do. You just mentioned the supper club that you're doing. We did one for a good friend of mine who's a gynecologist who just put out a book on problem periods for women, and we designed a supper club menu around some thoughts around adding fennel because that's been shown to improve dysmenorrhea. We added beans and legumes, we added certain iron rich vegetables, we added some seafood, we added omega-3 rich ingredients, and just starting a conversation about how your food is the gateway to improving health overall in a preventative manner and potentially even in a managerial point of view as well. So there's definitely some interesting things that we can do there. And I'd love to talk about that further when you're next down.
We should definitely do it. Nothing would be more fun for me than to get together with a fellow physician who also has a passion for cooking and the knowledge of and the creativity to be able to mix it up and do fun things together. When I talk about my style, when people say, Dr. Lee, what's your diet? I always tell people I'm not on a diet. Diets to me are impossible to stick to. They're all about extremes. They're more about philosophy and ideology, and sometimes a little bit of science. But they're more importantly, they're just really tough to stick to. I'm somebody who
Mm,
enjoys my food. I don't want to fear my food. I want to enjoy it. I have a great respect for ingredients. I love the flavors of food, and I love to. I wouldn't. Say, I don't like to pig out, but I do love to sample foods and have my taste buds lit up. It's part of my quality of life, and so I tell
Definitely.
people I don't have a diet I'm on, but I have an approach to my food, my eating, and the approach that I take is I call it the Mediterranean way of eating. I lived in the Mediterranean. I have an Asian background. I also lived in Asia. Um, if I go to a restaurant and I'm looking at lots of choices on a menu, I will automatically gravitate towards the more Mediterranean or the more Asian choices. If I'm entertaining at my home or cooking dinner just for myself, I'm thinking, what should I have? What should I have? What should I make? I'll automatically gravitate towards those genres of ingredients and techniques of preparation. If I'm
Mm.
at a buffet, and I've got all this a huge spread of choices, what you could actually have. Recently I did a little video. I went to see an incredible performance of U2, the rock band U2,
Aha.
at the Sphere, which is this
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
epic uh, live performance with huge definition and audiovisual. Now, look, if you're in Las Vegas, it's impossible to avoid the classic Las Vegas buffet. I did a video literally because I was overwhelmed and I was watching people pile as much food on their plate, and it just made me realize, OMG, there needs to be this is a teaching moment. So I took out a video, I busted out a video, and I did a video of like walking through the buffet line saying, this is good, this is not so good. Don't take this much, take this much, blah blah blah.
Mm.
And so I always think that, but the things that I focused on and gravitated on, thought about, were the Mediterranean preparations or the Asian preparations. So my style of eating
Yeah.
is Mediterranean. I challenge people who are listening or watching this to go to a restaurant and say, if you went to a Mediterranean restaurant, that there's nothing that you could find on the menu that you wouldn't like, or an Asian restaurant,
Yeah.
there's like nothing I can find here. I think most people are like something in these genres, and that makes the food of the idea of healthy eating much more approachable. It's something that is
Mm.
pleasurable to do. You can embrace a healthy diet. You don't have to fear your food. You can lean into it. And as I say, you can love your food to love your health.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Honestly, I can't wait to the next time. Lee, you are an absolute inspiration. And yeah, I can't wait till we get to enjoy a meal together and maybe even cook together as well.
Let's do it.
If you like this episode on the Doctor's Kitchen podcast, you will absolutely love this episode that I did with Dr. William Lee. It is fascinating. We talk about food as medicine, all the different types of foods that can increase metabolism, as well as the defenses that food can provide to you. Check it out right now by clicking on the link.